I came to Waikato about 5.5 years ago. Before that I spent 8 years at Hewlett-Packard and Agilient Technologies in California. Before that I worked for an RF company in Australia. I taught at Sydney University. Back in the 1980s I had my own electronics company. Before that I was a journalist, so I've had a great deal of experience. When I was an undergraduate in the 1970s, we used to think that if you were a good engineer, when you died and went to heaven, you got to work at Hewlett-Packard. Years later, I did get to work at HP, and when it spun out Agilent, and it was a fabulous experience to be in the innovative culture. It was a family. Someone actually telephoned me when I got there and said, "Welcome to the family, call us if you have any problems." Nobody had ever done that sort of thing for me before. The environment was fantastic. What you learned from that experience was fantastic. And I loved working for the company. I still love the company, even though it's rather different these days. When I was there, I built a small wooden table which sits now at the entrance to my office. It has a small train on it which carries around a little Hewlett-Packard carriage, just as a symbol of the fact that I'd been to heaven. An important part of commercialising something comes from you really wanting to see your baby out there. You know, I get students who will come to me and they say, "Yeah, I really want to work on something that's going to be patentable and make a lot of money." And you actually don't want to take those students on because they're just, you know, it's a business exercise and they're not there's no love of the technology. It has to start with the love of the technology. That's what Bill Hewlett loved what he did, and his ideas were loved by other people. He wasn't sitting there thinking, "I'm going to make a multinational company out of this." He said, "You know, if we've got something that's useful to people and it sells well, that's great." And that attitude is very, very important to something being seen through the distance. It's a long distance. You've got to love doing it, or you don't get from the start to the end. The tampered sensor came out of the fact that I was attached to a club, and the club rooms would get vandalised. And it reminded me of my favourite statue, which was in a park near where I lived in Sydney many years ago. And it kept getting vandalised, and the council would continuously repair this piece of sculpture. But eventually they got sick of doing that, and my favourite bit of sculpture disappeared. And the older people may remember when car burglar alarms first became a popular idea. You'd get a thunderstorm or a loud noise and all sorts of car burglar alarms everywhere would go off. And they often went off when the car wasn't being stolen, with the result that nowadays when a car burglar alarm goes off, people hardly raise an eyebrow. And I thought to myself, gee, I wish I had some way of protecting monuments, heritage listed buildings, that kind of thing, where people would pay attention to the alarm. They wouldn't assume it was a false alarm. And so, you know, we thought that would make a very fine student project. And we'd had some equipment that was ideal for the job. It was serendipity. The idea came together and it worked superbly well. I mean, we just couldn't believe how well it worked. We had competitions where we invited people to set this thing off by firing shotguns, you know, jumping up and down next to it, and we couldn't give away $1,000 for anybody who could set it off accidentally. So we knew it really worked superbly well, and that's where the product came from. It works using something you may have seen on old westerns. If you've seen one of these western movies where the Indian sticks his ear on the railway track and he can hear a train coming from a huge distance away, and the idea is that the sound travels far better in the track than it does in the air, and we're using exactly the same principle. So the thing is listening both to the environment, but also it's got its ear pressed against the thing it's trying to protect, and it knows that if there's a tremendous ruckus in the air, that a small amount of sound in the thing it's trying to protect is not a problem. But if it's a quiet evening and there's some serious noise attached to the object, then it probably means there's somebody with a crowbar trying to pry it open or break it off or whatever. And so using that same technology, it's doing an electronic version of the same thing with a tiny computer embedded the sensor, and it comes out that it's extremely cheap. It's very versatile. You can use it to protect the wrought iron grills on buildings. You could use it to protect statues. You can attach it to heritage buildings. I believe there's people thinking of using it to attach to a boat, on the theory that when someone actually steps on the boat, it's like the train coming down the rails. You can hear them coming. The smart sprinkler is something that's halfway between push and pull marketing. You've been able to get automatic irrigation systems for years. Farmers use them. They assess the rain, the temperature, all the environmental conditions, and they can adjust the amount of watering you do on your crops, and that's fantastic because it saves a lot of money. It doesn't water when you don't need it. It waters more if the weather conditions become extreme. You can also buy tap timers like this thing here, and they're designed for domestic use. You thread them on your garden tap, and you put your hose on the bottom, and you put a battery in it, and you dial up some sort of setting on it, and it waters your home vegetable patch or whatever. And they're a fantastic device domestically. They have the advantage they don't need any maintenance. They will sit there doing that happily for a year. And that can be water wasteful. And we know that in certain places, particularly the eastern coast of Australia and California in the US, are thinking of banning the sale of automatic irrigation devices which don't take conditions into account. And it occurred to us that we could build some smarts into these devices so that they measured the sunlight and the temperature, and they can do that very robustly. They won't need any maintenance. There's no probes running into the ground, no wires to rust, nothing that fills up with water accidentally. And once you've built the smarts in, because you can buy a small computer these days for less than $1, you could put that smarts into one of these things and you would not be increasing the price by more than $1 or $2. And so we've built this gadget, and we've done quite a bit of work and published it and mentioned it to WaikatoLink because we think this is a great idea. My personal belief is that it isn't going to sell until legislation demands that it happen, because the companies are happily selling the dumb sprinklers, so they don't have a whole lot of incentive to make them smart. But if that legislation comes in, we're certainly going to be ready, because we've spent a lot of time debugging and perfecting this gadget.